Donald Trump's former Attorney General Bill Barr raises a lot of eyebrows. He talks out of both sides of his mouth sometimes, saying that Donald Trump is a monster who should be prosecuted, but then he says the DOJ also clearly has a double standard. And we're always asking ourselves, how can Bill Barr, who says that there are problems with the DOJ, that they have done political prosecution hack jobs before in other cases like the Russian collusion hoax, how can they be so legitimate now? It's almost like he just picks and chooses which issues he's concerned about. But we're going to listen to him. We'll also go back down memory lane, because today, 2023 Bill Barr sounds a lot different than prior to 2020 Bill Barr. Old Bill Barr said a lot of stuff about voter fraud and how much of a problem it was, recognized by both countries. But something happened. 2023 Bill Barr doesn't sound anything like that. Here's what this Bill Barr says from this woman.
Or now
other kind of cover-up and obstruction.
A cover-up in the classified documents case.
Getting a subpoena for the surveillance tapes, then entering into a conspiracy to delete the surveillance tapes. So that certainly buttresses the government's case. And it's also quite typical. In this sense. You know, these two individuals, Nauta and Carlos, are dragged into this.
Yeah.
And their lives turned upside down.
Yeah, Trump
by
did
Trump
that. Trump did that, not the DOJ.
You know, this caper of his.
Trump's fault.
And he leaves in his wake ruined lives like this. The people who went up to Capitol Hill, these individuals, many of the people who served him in government that got sucked into things.
DOJ didn't do
and
that.
he just leaves all this carnage in his wake.
Do you think he cares about that?
No, he doesn't care about that.
No,
Loyalty is a one-way street.
The DOJ does, though, yeah.
And in many ways, you know, I think these two people down in Mar-a-Lago represent many Republicans who feel that they have to man the ramparts and defend this guy no matter what he does and go along with him.
We defend him because of what your institution has done.
I think they have to be careful or they're going to end up as part of the carnage.
We're tired of the DOJ. We're tired
That's what your
of the
message is
FBI.
to those people who do feel that sense of loyalty to him?
I think we all have primary loyalty to the Constitution and the country, not to any particular individual.
Really?
And, you know, at some point, trying to defend the indefensible really demeans you.
Well, like Hillary Clinton destroying her emails on a secret server with a hammer or using bleach bit. You guys going to scream and shout about that one? No, of course not. You're going to scream about Biden's documents, his classified documents? No, you're not. Because neither one of them were president, by the way. And Donald Trump was president. And they'll just sit around here and just play this patty cake game without recognizing reality. It's bizarre.
He always says he had a right to declassify the documents or take them with him. I mean, if he really thought that, why would he ask someone to delete security surveillance footage?
Because they're his cameras.
The whole thing. If he really thought he had the right to have the documents, there were umpteen ways for him to assert that when he was asked by the government and during that 1.5-year period. He never did. He never asserted it in a lawful way.
So it's an obstruction crime.
He obstructed the subpoena.
It's an obstruction crime.
Both subpoenas.
So that's what he's mostly offended about. I don't think he thinks that this classified documents thing is that big of a problem, but he's irritated that Trump didn't respond to the subpoena, right? The DOJ, these people, they've been lifers there. They've been there for 40 years. I don't know what the total length of time is, but it's like family, right? It's like their entire identity is the Department of Justice. And so when they say, we ask for something and you reject them, you say, wait a minute, I don't give a crap what you asked for. I am a president. I am literally above the law as guided by the Constitution. Then they say, well, he didn't respond to our standards and therefore it is illegal and reprehensible. But I don't think that's a proven element yet. That's his opinion because he doesn't want his institution to get a black eye, but it's not a legal theory. Trump might still have, right? In my opinion, Trump has total unfettered authority to have those documents thanks to the opinion clause, which is in the Constitution.
You've said before that at its core, this is an obstruction case because you say, you know, if he gave the documents back, he would have never been indicted. But what do you say to Republicans? And this
he didn't have to give the documents back. They indicted him anyways. That's the point.
Includes 2024 GOP candidates who say it's unfair for him to be prosecuted for that. They say it's a process crime.
It's agua. I mean, this is a grand jury subpoena asking for the documents, and he makes his lawyer, puts his lawyer in a position of making a false statement that a full search was made when he knew it wasn't, and in fact prevented the lawyer from making it. I mean, that's the essence of obstruction of a grand jury. It doesn't get more serious than that.
That's what he's upset about.
What would you say? He just brought on 2 new attorneys, Todd Blanche in April, John Lara just now. I mean, given what has happened with other attorneys that he's had, what's your advice to his attorneys? Do you have any?
Get a lot of insurance.
Funny, Bill.
They'll be spending a lot of time themselves at some point before grand juries or answering questions or as witnesses in investigations.
Yeah, do you think that's appropriate? Do you think that's okay? You think it's funny to joke about that? They're going to be spending a lot of time in front of grand juries and they're going to be investigated for representing their client, Bill? You think this is a joke? There are organizations trying to take away lawyers' law licenses for representing Donald Trump. Entire organizations built to do that. Don't we have the right to counsel in this country? Bill, do you think it's appropriate for outside external pressures and other prosecutors to breach attorney-client privilege and drag them in front of grand juries because they don't want you to represent their political enemy? It's disgusting and insane, and he just laughs about it.
He's spending a lot of money on legal fees, too.
Yeah,
his political action committee spent more than $40 million on legal fees already this year. I mean, what do you make of his supporters, his political supporters, giving him money to his campaign, and he then uses that for his legal fees and his co-defendants' legal fees?
Yeah, I find that sort of nauseating. I mean, this guy claims to be a multi-billionaire, and he goes out and raises money from hardworking people, small donors, and tells them this is to defend America and to take care of the election. He didn't provide any significant support during the 22 elections, and a lot of this money seems to be going to his legal fees.
Because
you just mentioned earlier that you don't believe in the weaponization of the Justice Department. That's something we often hear from members of Congress who are loyal to him after he gets indicted in these cases. I mean, does that undermine trust in the department that you used to lead?
Does what undermine it?
When Republicans come out and say, this is a two-tiered justice system.
No, I mean, I do think I do think that there is a double standard. I think it's sometimes I think that the department tends to go far more aggressively after Republican or allegations of Republican wrongdoing than Democrat, and I've seen it myself. I've lived through it. I've seen it. Now it's not as pervasive as is represented, and it's not automatic. And I think there's still many great prosecutors in the department who can check their politics and be fair to whoever it is, regardless of their politics. But I do think that there's some political actors in the department, and I'm glad that Chairman Coleman.
So he agrees with us after that entire litany of what a monster Trump is. Oh yeah, I mean, no, Caitlin Collins says, well, I mean, you disagree that there's a double standard. He says, no, I think there is a double standard. There are political actors in there. Bill, that's what we have been saying. That's the whole point of this. Jack Smith, Merrick Garland, Lisa Monaco, Matthew Graves, all of them. Political hack prosecutors. So how can you sit there and tell us in the first 5 minutes of this interview that Trump is this monster?
Is conducting his investigation.
Well, speaking of that, one thing we've heard is that you mentioned Hunter Biden earlier. David Weiss, the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who's handling that investigation, did you ever consider making him special counsel before you left office?
Yes, I did consider it, but I felt that a couple of things. One, I didn't want to set a precedent of setting on the way out the door of appointing a special counsel to investigate essentially, the children of the incoming president and the family of the incoming president. I think that would become sort of de rigueur and it would be a bad development. Second, I didn't think there was a basis for me to do it because our department didn't have a conflict of interest. And it had to be left up to Garland to make that decision for his department. He had to determine whether he had a conflict and he should bring in a special counsel. And if I preempted that decision,
he gives the entire decision about what to do with the Biden family back to the Biden family. Nice.
Thought it would give them the basis for saying this was a political move and we're going to terminate him. We're just going to kick it out. And it would have given them cover, I think, to end the investigation. I believed he would keep the investigation going and keep Weiss in place, and he did.
Yeah, he
Trump
did.
has promised that if he gets back into office,
How'd that go there, Bill? Good call. Do you trust the IRS whistleblowers? Or do you think David Weiss and Merrick Garland did a good job on that?
Very blatant about.
Didn't get that question from Caitlin, though.
About using the Justice Department to go after his political opponents. Do you worry that he would weaponize it if he was back in office?
I sure hope so. He better.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's so ironic all these people are getting huffy about weaponization, which they should.
We should.
Because we can't go tit for tat.
Oh, we're going to.
But Trump,
we're going to.
As you say, I mean, he's very clear about it. I think there's no question that he believes these institutions should be used to go after his enemies.
Yeah, that's right. You guys started it, Bill. You enabled it by allowing all this to happen. And now it is going to go both ways. It's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, this is how it works. Because if you're in an adversarial system and the one side is stabbing you in the back 35 times when you're trying to write a bill for the country, and you don't protect your back and then stab them in the back, well, then you're all going to get stabbed to death. And it's not a good situation to be in. So Bill Barr is one of the most bizarre, interesting people. He says that in 5 minutes, Trump's a monster, but the DOJ is pretty weaponized. And, there could be some problems about it. But that was new Bill Barr. This was old Bill Barr. This was Bill Barr before something happened, going at it with Wolf.
This is a sort of cheap talk to get around the fundamental problem, which is the bipartisan commission chaired by Jimmy Carter and James Baker said back in 2009 that mail-in voting is fraught with the risk of fraud and coercion.
But since then, there have been
until
a lot
this
of investigations that haven't proved
Pipe down,
let me
Wolf.
talk.
Yeah,
Pipe
please.
down.
And since that time, there have been in the newspapers, in networks, academic studies saying it is open to fraud and coercion. The only time the narrative changed is after this administration came in.
Weird.
But elections that have been held with mail have found substantial fraud and coercion. For example, we indicted someone in Texas, 1,700 ballots collected from people who could vote. He made them out and voted for the person he wanted to, okay?
Because
that kind of thing happens with mail-in ballots, and everyone knows
But
it.
there are individual cases, but as far as widespread fraud, we haven't seen that since...
Well, we haven't had the kind of widespread use of mail-in ballots that's being proposed.
Yeah.
We've had absentee ballots from people who request them from a specific address. Now what we're talking about is mailing them to everyone on the voter list when everyone knows those voter lists are inaccurate. People who should get them don't get them, which is what has been one of the major complaints in states that have tried this in municipal elections. And people who get them are not the right people. They're people who have replaced the previous occupant, and they can make them out. And sometimes multiple ballots come to the same address with a whole several generations of occupants.
Weird.
Do you think that's a way to run a vote?
So far,
No.
we haven't seen widespread fraud. But
So far, we haven't tried it.
Well,
and the point
there's
is,
been a lot of us. There are several states that only have mail-in voting, including a Republican
well,
state
this
like
is playing
Utah.
with fire. This is playing with fire. We're a very closely divided country here. And if people have to have confidence in the results of the election and the legitimacy of the government,
Who is this
and people
guy?
trying to change the rules to this methodology, which, as a matter of logic, is very open to fraud and coercion, is reckless and dangerous. And the people are playing with fire.
Wow. Okay, so I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't know what happened, but old Bill Barr, a lot better than new Bill Barr, that's for sure. Now, there are some serious questions about this. We're asking what the DOJ has done. Obviously, Bill Barr says there's a double standard here. We know that to be true. This story came over from CBS, from Catherine Herridge, who does great work on this stuff, has said that the lawyer for the ex-NYPD commissioner, Bernard Kerik, says that Jack Smith, the special counsel, may not have even reviewed the records before indicting Trump. May not have even reviewed the records. Thousands of pages of records that were obviously turned over by New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik. They demanded the records. Bernard Kerik delivered them, handed over the documents to Smith as part of the federal investigation. In the 45-page indictment, we know what the charges are. But the documents came from Kerik, and they were submitted to Smith on July 23rd. A source close to Kerik's legal team said at the time they believed the records, which include sworn affidavits from people raising concerns about the integrity of the 2020 election contest, show that there was a genuine effort to investigate claims of voter fraud, right? Jack Smith says, I want to know if you guys really thought that this was a fraudulent election. He says, can I see your records? Kerik's legal team sends thousands of pages of documents. They don't even look at them. In an August 2nd email to Parlatori that CBS reviewed, a special counsel office prosecutor requested, quote, responsive documents as to which Trump campaign is no longer asserting a privilege. Parlatori sent the documents and said he was, quote, stunned when after the indictment came down, the prosecutor contacted him asking for the records he said I already provided. He said, I already gave you those. You didn't look at them? And he said, you should have, because those records, this is a former Trump lawyer, he says those records are absolutely exculpatory, all right? So Jack Smith didn't even look at them. They bear directly on the essential element, he says, of whether Rudy Giuliani or therefore Trump knew that their claims were false. He said good faith reliance upon claims of fraud, even if they later turn out to be false, is very different than pushing fraud claims that you know to be false, which is absolutely the distinction there, put brilliantly. Trump can believe that there was fraud, even if the fraud fraud claims were inaccurate. Different than saying, I know that there was no fraud and we're going to say that there was fraud anyways. That's the standard in my reading of the law that they have to prove. Now, the left is saying they don't have to prove that at all. They need to prove, from our reading here, Trump knew that the election was legitimate and said it was fraudulent regardless. Parlatore told CBS News last week he expected Carrick to be interviewed by investigators soon, but that hasn't happened yet. Parlatore was among the key lawyers working for Trump in the DOJ investigations into him, but he left the legal team in May. A spokesman for Jack Smith's office declined to comment. Another prosecutor said it may have been an oversight. He said, Carrick's not a primary witness to the case. He says, I tend to think that special counsel are gathering evidence for discovery, and we don't know if they even looked at the documents. The tranche of the documents that was reviewed by CBS that was provided to Smith include emails between Carrick and a range of Trump lawyers, consultants, and allies. Lots of emails. Sidney Powell's on the list. Jenna Ellis is on the list. They were both working on this, as well as members of Trump's campaign like Jason Miller, Boris Epstein. The batch that CBS reviewed also includes communications with Bannon, Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn. Bannon was indicted in 2020 for allegedly defrauding online donors. He was pardoned by Trump. Trump pardoned Flynn, already pled guilty during his political prosecutions. The records indicate an email sent from a Georgia Republican Party chair, David Schaefer, to Carrick, an aide to Giuliani. The materials reviewed also include business information related to Dominion, an electronic voting company. Trump has denied any wrongdoing, but we don't even know if they read the document. And then we've got Nancy Pelosi. She came out on MSNBC to talk Trump indictment. This is the same woman who was recording herself with her daughter in her little faux documentary on January 6th. The same woman who said, I've been waiting for this when Donald Trump, apparently when January 6th happened, she was just thrilled about it.
The former president of the United States is going to be arraigned in the courthouse that you were thinking about that day on January 6th. How does that feel for you?
Well, heartbreaking, because a president of the United States did not have respect for the office that he held. Heartbreaking for the fact that some people in our country still believe him. And I respect their point of view. I don't respect the members of Congress who were under threat that night. I was going to get a bullet in the head. The vice president was going to get strangled, strangled or whatever, hung. What? And they were all under threat, and many of them scared of what might happen. And we had, some of us had, I had my security.
A bullet
so
in the head?
I wasn't particularly worried about myself. I could see on TV that they were shouting my name and coming after me and all that. And that was incited by the president of the United States.
It was incited by Trump. You mean the same Trump that they just let out of custody without any bond at all?
But I was more concerned about the vice president because of what the president, what clearly he had in mind. But the most horrible part about it was, of course, the trauma it caused for people who didn't have the security I had, and the fact that when we said we're going back to the floor to show the world that the United States of America is going to have a peaceful transfer of power in this very time frame, it would not be the day because it would be in the came in the middle of the night, that a majority of the Republicans in the House voted against the peaceful transfer of power and followed the lead of their puppeteer as he shines the light on the strings as he orchestrates them. It's so sad for our country.
It is a sad state of affairs for our country. People like her were instigating the entire ordeal to happen, thrilled when it did happen, and exploited it for their own personal gain. And they're now blaming their political opponents, who they do not want to win, for all of the conduct. Many of the conduct is their misconduct that they are trying to misapply. So Bill Barr confirms there's a double standard, and he admits that there's a lot of evidence of voter fraud, but he still doesn't like Trump for some reason.